all of you, take us back to May 2nd, when Politico dropped this leaked draft opinion on a really important case. What were your thoughts and feelings?
I'll go first because I think I have a very, very unique experience. May 2nd was Eid al-Adha, so it marked the end of Ramadan, where we fasted for 30 days from sunup to sundown. This was not the Eid gift I was expecting. We were out with family celebrating, and we saw the leaked article, and all of a sudden you go into what now and what happens, what if, and then you remind yourself it's not what if anymore. It's where do we go from here? And you have to, as so many people, pivot and go to plan B and plan C, and then remind yourself that they're also trying to take away plan B. And so it was a very jarring moment, but one thing was clear is that we have to continue to advocate, continue to stand up, and Eid gift and all, kept marching forward.
Yeah, you know, there is this balance of some disbelief that we're here, and also this acknowledgement of we've seen this coming, right? This isn't a surprise. We've all been screaming about this for a long time, right? At various times, various iterations, and yet seeing it in print, it hits differently. Sort of no matter where we've been in this fight and what we've been prepared for, it's still crushing and different. So I spent much of the following day in my colleague's office, who is here sitting supporting me tonight. And it was amazing, you know, the floods of messages that came in from the people who do the work every day, right? There was sort of one text stream of that kind of functional what now. And then a lot of folks who I don't think believed that it was coming, right? And in some ways that's frustrating because again, for so many of us, we have been standing up and screaming this, right? When someone tells you who they are, believe them, right? And that's where we've been. And also welcome, right? And join the fight, even a day late, right? Like welcome. And so sitting with all of that, I think is where it was.
Shruti?
Sure. So I think my reactions were quite similar. Upon reading the draft, you know, I think it had been pretty clear that Roe was going to be overturned based on what was going on in the Texas case and some other things. But the breadth and sort of arrogance of the opinion, I think, was quite shocking. And partly because it was probably meant to be a draft that would have been slightly toned down, at least in terms of the tone of it. I think it was also interesting because the draft opinion came out late at night, the night before we had elections here in Monroe County, where Bloomington is located. And the whole day, I was actually working at the election that whole day, the following day, and the entire day people kept coming in looking shell-shocked and kind of just saying, I never thought this could happen, and it did. And I think, if nothing else, the sheer clarity and breadth and sort of horror of the opinion, I think, really made clear how important voting is for us, right? And so it sort of made the day, I think, quite a bittersweet and poignant one, although I found hope in the fact that people seemed really, really mobilized. So I guess I can't say I was shocked by what the opinion had in it. I think I was expecting that, but I was definitely shocked at how broad the scope was and how it really seems to be setting the stage for rolling back a whole array of rights. And this is just the first shot across the bow, I think, unfortunately.
So I think all of us kind of, our first instinct was how do we help our community? How do we help those around us? How do we make sure that people understand what's going on? But what about our own health? In our own futures, what can we do? What is the most important things that we can do to protect our own health and our own contraceptive future? That's true.
well.
Mhm.
So everyone's going to be at a really different place in this journey, right? And what their needs are really different. I think is part of why that feels a little bit challenging to answer in a succinct way. You know, there are so many contraception options out there. So in the immediate moment when there isn't a threat, right, or a direct threat, there are access issues, there are numerous issues, but for you and the people that you love and that are in your org, right? It's not just the pill, right? There's infinite options, and I feel a little bit like I'm probably preaching to the choir in this room, right? But consider a LARC, consider how long-acting reversible contraception, right? There are options that are as effective as getting your tubes tied, if that's an option for you, right? And Path for You and other organizations and healthcare providers make that access easier, right? Again, we can talk about that more. Knowing that for some people, the LARC isn't the right choice, right? And whatever your contraceptive needs are, find a provider that will meet them. That's where we are today, right? Finding something that works well for you and a provider that will meet you where you are and meet your needs.
Absolutely. I would just piggyback off of that and say, figure out a long-term plan for yourself. That's not to say that you necessarily need a long-term contraceptive, but a long-term plan for yourself. Because what we're seeing in other states is legislatures that are coming after contraceptives. So figure out what that is for you and stop spreading misinformation about what's happening. You know, as soon as that article came out, people were saying, okay, well, you can't get an abortion in Indiana anymore. That's not true. You can still get an abortion in the state of Indiana. So anytime we further perpetuate this misinformation, it just hurts everyone around us. It's so important that we do that. Part of what we do at Women for Change is we elevate the public conversation and dialogue around a subject, as we did with consent. In 24 days, Indiana will join 19 states and Washington, D.C. in defining consent, in part thanks to Women for Change. But that was done because we had public dialogue, conversation, mobilize people. I think as a society, a lot of what we do is so reactive after the fact. You know, we saw the storm coming and then the political article came out and we're like, what do we do now? We've been seeing this for 50 years. So let's, as a society, not be as reactive so that we're not in this moment again. You know, our privilege shows when we disengage. And then when things get bad, we want back into the fight. You can't opt in and opt out. This is not a newsletter, this is real life.
Sure, do you have any comments on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what both of our panelists said, and I think it's extremely important when you're thinking about either healthcare or legal access to remember just what Rima said, that until the Dobbs final decision actually comes out and until the Indiana legislature does something in response, that abortion is legal both in the United States and in Indiana. And so whatever healthcare you need, that's not going to change immediately. You know, now's the time to make the plans for making sure you have a trusted provider, thinking about what things you'll need to access right away, and then sort of preparing for the next step is, you know, I think as Rima said, being involved is really important, not forgetting people who might be in a different situation than you, right? It may be that you personally don't need a birth control prescription or something like that, but other people might, and so do what you can to support them, but also start making plans, you know, make sure you're registered to vote, make sure you know who your representatives are, and start calling them now, right? And demanding that they support access, that they support women's health, that they support pregnant people's health, and do what you can now to make whatever happens in the future less bad. I also think I want to make the point that there are already access networks in Indiana and elsewhere, even if abortion were to be banned in Indiana. So it's important, again, to turn to trusted sources and providers and people who are already doing this work, as opposed to possibly sharing incorrect information on social media or sharing information about health, about different, I've seen a lot of people sharing information on social media that might be incorrect. So just be really careful about trying to share as much correct information as possible. And I said, start getting ready for the fights to come.
I want to just add one thing onto that, which is, so do what you need to do to feel comfortable and prepared, but don't hoard, right? A lot of people are talking about get all of the emergency contraception that you can access. Please don't. It has an expiration date, right? So unless you have a mechanism where you really plan to distribute that, which by the way, those networks exist, right? If you don't have that in place already, you're not about to make one realistically. So have one in your cupboard so that you feel confident, so that you can feel confident for your children or your neighbor, but you probably don't need to start your own in-home pharmacy, right?
And another note, if you do have a network that you're planning on distributing to, if you've already made those plans, buy online and save the pharmacy stock for people in dire need and emergency services. Say you can run out of stock online and that's fine, but if you run out in the pharmacy and someone is in need, we're in an emergency situation. Thank you for those points. So we've talked a lot about our personal safety and what we can do to kind of prepare, but I want to switch the conversation to what does the future of abortion access look like in Indiana regarding this possibility that Roe v. Wade might be overturned. That's open internet.
I think we need to remember that when this is overturned, that it's going to hurt brown and Black women and women of a lower socioeconomic class the hardest, because women that are able to are going to travel and seek an abortion. It's not ideal. It's harder. There's a barrier, but for people that are unable to, they're not going to be able to go anywhere. And so this is going to increase, or this could increase the number of deaths among these women. This is going to hurt them and their families' economic stability the hardest. As we all sit and complain about gas prices, this could be detrimental to so many families in Indiana. So if you are able to donate to an abortion fund, I know that there are a number of them, please do that, because this is really going to limit women's economic stability. It's going to have an effect on their lives and the lives of their families.
Shruti, do you want to go next? I don't want to leave you last every time, just because you're on the screen.
Oh, sure. I can go now, and thankfully my daughter's with a grandparent right now, so good time to speak. So yeah, I mean, I again would echo that the future of abortion access in Indiana looks extremely grim, right? And what we're waiting to find out now, so basically, because of what happened in the Texas cases, Roe has already been effectively overruled, and that gives state legislatures the green light to start putting together whatever extreme legislation they want to right now. And so the remaining question for us in Indiana is how far the Indiana legislature is going to go. Are they going to merely ban abortion after a certain number of weeks? Are they going to ban it entirely? Are they going to criminalize it? Are they going to criminalize and police pregnancy? The answer to most of those questions is probably yes. And like Rima said, that we know that whatever is going to happen is going to fall most heavily on people who are already marginalized and multiply marginalized. And I think we need to be aware of attempts that will be made to split solidarity, right? To turn people against one another. So, for example, I think you are going to start seeing a lot of really ugly stereotypes put forth, you know, a lot of racist stereotypes, a lot of dog whistling, a lot of those types of things to justify whatever impositions the Indiana legislature is going to do. And so when you hear those things, you know, think about how we're all in this together, right? Everybody is affected. Please don't fall for those dog whistles, whatever they are. If they're talking about, what we've seen in the past is that people, many people will be experiencing extremely hard times, and the people that the anti-abortion side will choose as their poster children, or the people that they want to make the examples of first, will be people caught in very difficult circumstances, and the most negative aspect of their circumstances will be played up in order to prey upon people's prejudices, right? That's the playbook that we see over and over again. So I would urge everybody, when you see these things happening, don't think about how, oh, well, I might have money and that person doesn't, or that person lives in this area and I live in somewhere else. Stop thinking about those things and focus on how everyone's rights are at risk, and it's important for every single person. None of us wants to be the weak link, right? We don't want to be the weak link that causes this house of cards to fall upon someone else. And I just want everybody to kind of focus on the big thing, that we need to protect everybody's rights, and don't fall for all of these sort of these old playbooks meant to divide people. This is the moment when we really need to come together.
These were such more eloquent answers, because when you say, what does the state of abortion access in Indiana look like? My answer is bleak. So I appreciate the minute to think from both of you. So, you said it is our marginalized folks that will be most impacted, though everyone will, right? I think also about teenagers. I think also about trans and non-binary folks. There are so many people that are going to be harmed, right? And whether that feels personal to you, I'm guessing that by virtue of you being in this room, you are taking it personally. To take it in a slightly different direction, I also want to acknowledge that the landscape is different than the last time that abortion was not legal in this country, right? So self-managed abortion using medication is actually very safe. That doesn't mean that access will be particularly easy, right? But I do just want to highlight that it is a different landscape. Medication abortion is safe, and that's important for people to know.
All very good things to consider as our current state in Indiana for abortions. I want to switch a little bit and ask a question to you, Kara. Our most vulnerable populations, right? Our low-income women, our minority women, also our young people are in there as well, because there's a ton of misinformation. There's a ton of things online that are being shared that might not be true. We are really bad at sexual health in this state, and sexual health education in this state. So to you, what are some of the things that you identify as most important for us to be teaching the young people in our community in regards to sexual health and sexual health education?
Yeah, okay. So the first thing that always comes to mind is consent, period, right? I'm so grateful for the work of Women for Change over the last few years. We've got to teach our young people how to talk about sex, right? And consent. I think, there's so much fear that when we give people information about contraception and about safer sex, that is seen as giving them permission to go out and have sex, right? And that's not true, right? We actually know that the more information people have, the more likely they are to make safe and healthy choices, right? So that's the message that I wish that people would hear. People deserve medically accurate, inclusive, comprehensive sex education, right? I'd add trauma informed to that. Sex is complicated. Society makes sex complicated. There are risks, right, with sex. Like there are STIs, there's unintended pregnancy, there's sexual violence, right? There are risks, and it's okay for us to inform people about that. But there's also positive things about sex and sexuality, right? And it's also okay for people to hear about that, to hear about the reasons that people want to have sex for pleasure, for connection, in age appropriate, again, medically accurate ways.
I would, in an abstinence only state, don't leave it up to your school or the internet to provide age appropriate sex ed to your child. Because they're not gonna get it. They're just not. So if you're a parent, if you have the consent of a parent to talk to another child, teach them at home so that they don't have to seek information or get misinformation from other sources, including school, because we are an abstinence only state. And that's really, really important. You know, there are lessons that our kids get from school and they're from home as well. And so I'm a mother of 3, and that's part of my job as a mom, is to teach my child age appropriate sex ed, because I know they're not going to get it from school, and what they find online is not helpful.
I myself was a sex ed facilitator for a while for young women in the community, and I also have a daughter, age 8. I work at Planned Parenthood, so there's a lot of curious materials that lay around our house. Recently, my daughter did find a vibrator, a work vibrator, not a personal one. So we had to have a conversation about pleasure and what this tool is used for, and in an age appropriate way that an 8-year-old can understand. And I want to ask the crowd, just a quick poll. We're all of like different ages and different backgrounds here. How many of you remember taking sex ed in school? Okay. Keep your hand up if it was comprehensive and inclusive. That's rough. So again, I mean, it just adds to the conversation. When we're talking about reproductive health, we have to talk about sex education because those things go hand in hand. So a question for the whole group. Sorry for that little snippet of engagement, but I want to know how we can advocate for realistic change in abortion policy in Indiana. How can we push for these changes at a clinical level, at a country level, at a state level, city level, neighborhood level? What can we do?
Or should
Do you want to start?
Trying to take us down.
So we should be pushing for as much national level change as we can. I think the federal government's options are a little bit limited right now, but that's where change needs to happen in order to fully protect rights, because this is an equality issue and a human rights issue, and it's our Constitution and the Supreme Court and the federal government who are supposed to be guaranteeing those rights for everybody. Clearly, some parts of those branches are not. But if we want abortion and reproductive health to remain accessible and safe and legal throughout the United States, we have to work at the federal level and the constitutional level. In the interim, while we try and do that, I think it's really important, first of all, to share information. I was going to build a little bit on what the other 2 panelists just said about information on sexual health. We need the general public to be educated on what is involved in all of these things, so that people actually make policies that are based on actual real life and actual facts. So for example, we've all seen the debates about abortion going on around the country. We've seen different debates based on on breastfeeding and formula, based on the formula shortage. There's a tampon shortage. It's so clear that so many policymakers haven't the faintest idea how pregnancy, menstruation, breastfeeding, childbirth, different types of childcare, that people just have no idea how they work. And so we end up with these, people don't even realize that somebody can be, that the moment you conceive, you're actually considered to be 2 weeks pregnant, right? Even though the day before you conceived, you were not pregnant, because of the way that people count. So an abortion ban at 6 weeks, it really means 4 weeks and things like that. We really need people to understand all of that. And hopefully that will make an impact, right? We have people saying ridiculous things like ectopic pregnancies can be excised and put into the uterus and things like that, which are just completely not possible, but also incredibly dangerous. We shouldn't have state legislators saying these things, even though they are the people saying these things, right? We need like accurate information for everyone. In the meantime, in Indiana, as I said, it's highly likely that the Indiana legislature is going to move quickly to put in some really stringent requirements. So what we will need to do is obviously map out exactly what they do and what's legal and what's not, but then work at your local level and work again with trusted providers to see if you can, work on the worst impacts of what some of this might be, right? So for example, talk to your local prosecutors and ask them not to prosecute women who are miscarrying or have been, or just to not engage in the policing of pregnancy. Talk to healthcare providers and figure out who is not going to report a woman who comes in either miscarrying or might have had an abortion and desperately needs healthcare, right? No one should fear being reported to the police and, being put in jail for seeking healthcare. Talk to people to see if they will do those things. Then support the abortion funds and the reproductive health organizations that are already working in Indiana, right? Do what you can to fund those organizations, either, if you have financial resources to do so, or your time, or spread the word on what they're doing and how to get them support. And I think what we'll have to do is, think very creatively to figure out how to provide access to whatever care is possible in the aftermath of, these quite, we're gonna see something strict and awful. And I think the best hope at this point is that the Indiana legislature will write something, either they have a history of writing things that don't make sense and aren't implementable, and that's probably our best bet right now. Right? So they do some things that are ridiculous that can be returned because of that, or at least delayed in terms of its implementation because it doesn't make any sense. So that's what I'll be looking for, is that they continue with their, relatively uneven legislative drafting skills. How's that? That's my nice way of putting it.
All of that. All of that, and in 2021, states introduced 663 abortion-related restrictions and enacted 108 of them. If you are not involved January through March or January through April every single year, don't be as surprised what happens on May 2nd. Treat your advocacy like you do your elections. Local matters. So, be involved at a local level, and be involved and support organizations that are doing the work and are present and are advocating for you every single day. If you have the means to support national as well, that's great, but it's your local organizations that are really going to continue to mobilize, continue to advocate, and continue to stay involved with the Indiana General Assembly. So treat your advocacy like you do your elections. Local matters, and keep moving forward that way.
I echo everything that was said. I think, when we think about the reality of what is almost for sure coming here, while I personally believe that any reason that someone wants to seek an abortion is valid, right? I am hoping that there may be some exceptions that can be advocated for, right? In living in the reality of the situation and sort of skating around some harm reduction, I guess. Right. So I hope that we will see strong advocacy for a rape and incest exception. I hope that we will see advocacy for a lethal fetal anomaly exception. I hope that we will see life and health of the mother, right? And those shouldn't be the terms that we're talking about, but if this is where we are, I hope that we're lifting all of those things up. And sometimes that feels like the best we can do right now.
What I'm hearing you saying is be realistic about where we are. So when you see organizations that are advocating for these exceptions, don't get mad and say, why aren't you advocating for all of it? Because we're being realistic about where we are at. right?
Here, you touched on a lot of good points about those who will be most affected, rape cases, fetal anomaly cases. What can we do to include trauma-informed care? I understand that you were trained in trauma-informed care. What can we do to include that in our legislation and in our advocacy after the post-war society?
Yeah, so trauma-informed really means recognizing sort of the ubiquity of trauma, right? The sort of universal experience of traumas, and then the way that trauma impacts and affects all of us, and then responding appropriately, right? And striving to not re-traumatize as we move forward, right? So we talk about this a lot in healthcare, we talk about this a lot in education, but truly this is an approach that I think needs to be universally applied, right? Not only to patients or clients we serve, but also to our communities. So largely, it looks like being a good human to everyone that you meet, right? A little bit, it's the belief in trusting that everyone is fighting a harder battle, right? Trusting that everyone has things underneath the surface, and then no one owes you a disclosure, right? 1 in 4 women have an abortion in their lifetimes, right? 90% of people use contraception at some point in their lives, right? This impacts all of us, and so treating each person as they work on these issues with compassion and humanity goes a long way. We know that trauma impacts people's health at every level, right? Behaviors, mental health and physical health, long-term physical health. And so acknowledging that is just really imperative to overall public health of our society. There is some legislation to think about movement to work on requiring trauma-informed education, right? We see that mostly in for teachers, it's again like unfunded mandates, hooray, right? But we could include that for healthcare. We could push again just education on trauma in as many spheres as possible, and our whole society would be gentler, kinder, healthier, and better.
Shruti, I have a specific question for you because you brought up our wonderful Indiana legislators and some of the skills that they lack in making some clear defining legislation. We recently last session had a legislation be introduced for coerced abortion and outlining the act of coercing someone into an abortion and as a felony. And we saw lots of misinformation, lots of gray area, lots of questions after this was introduced. It did not pass, it's not a law, so thanks for that. But with your experience in international law, are there any women's health related laws that you observe that have had extreme success or extreme failure like those that we've seen in Indiana?
So that's a great question. And the bill you brought up, I think, is a perfect example of how people, when they're trying to roll back rights, they try to use stereotypes and not really tell people what they're doing, right? The word coerced abortion sounds terrible, and they were trying to create this specter of something happening that wasn't really happening in Indiana, and trying to get people to get on board with something that they probably wouldn't be on board with if they knew exactly what was in that legislation and what the impacts were, right? So look out for terms like that. I want to start with the particularly bad, and then I'll go to the particularly good. So we've already seen particularly bad here in Indiana. So Indiana was the first state in the nation to pass a forced sterilization bill. This was in 1906 or 1907, and so it's important to understand that Roe protects the right to not have a child, but it also protects the right to have a child, right? It protects choice, that the person has, the pregnant person has the ability to choose. And if Roe is gone, and when Dobbs comes out, that means that the right to access abortion will probably be gone, but that also means the right to push back against interference from the government that wants to, pass a forced sterilization law. Those could be legal as well, right? So we don't. So this is what I meant about how we don't know how bad things could get in Indiana, and it's important for people who, if they're, if people are against abortion, Roe actually protected the right to not be coerced to have an abortion, right? Like, so if you have Roe, you didn't need this bill that the Indiana legislature was passing, right? They were just trying to do exactly, pretty much the opposite of what they said they were, right? That's the common playbook is to like use some nice sounding terms or try to evoke sympathy and have the law actually do something very different from what the average person will think it means, right? The person who's not going to sit there and read all 75 pages of it. So in terms of positive laws, I think we have a pretty good idea of what that means. It means empowering the person who is immediately impacted by the law, emphasizing personal autonomy, emphasizing the right to have information and to make, a person to make their own decisions about their body and their family and their life. And we see there are so many good examples of these laws all over the country, or all over the world. And most countries that wrote their constitutions relatively recently actually have taken a much more human rights centered approach to writing their constitutions and equality provisions than the United States has. And there are a lot of countries that include a right to health care, or that include when people are talking about health care or access to health care, that there's some kind of state responsibility to make sure that people can access health care or to protect rights in these ways. So we actually have a tremendous number of examples all over the world of positive laws that empower people and provide support where it's needed. And just a tiny example, again, to show where the US is an outlier, is you probably have all heard that the US is the only country, there's only one other country in the world that doesn't provide parental leave, that doesn't provide support after the birth of a child. And so again, we can look almost anywhere in the world for a better set of laws that would protect equality and childcare and be, pro-family, pro-children, all these different types of things. At the same time, we can see two trends going on worldwide. There's a number of countries that are sort of moving towards more authoritarian models that are rolling back women's rights around the country and then around the world. And then there are countries that are doing the opposite and trying to expand access for both women's rights and healthcare. So Mexico just decriminalized abortion and made it much more accessible in the last couple of years. Canada is moving in that direction as well. So there are so many good examples that we could look at all over the world. And we can even look at the recent American past, right, for some better laws. So wasn't very uplifting, I think, but hopefully that's a little bit of a roadmap for going forward.
Thank you. Any other comments on? My next question is for everyone, and it kind of ties along with what Shruti was talking about. So if we're looking at a post-Roe society, how can we shift this discussion about abortion to being focused on this importance of choice and bodily autonomy, rather than a political identity or a stigma that someone has?
I don't know that I'm going to answer your question exactly as you phrased it here. I think the thing that continually baffles me and that leaves me really frustrated is that I feel like in trying to have a good faith conversation and realistic conversation, if we want to decrease the number of abortions, we need to increase access to birth control. We need to increase access to comprehensive sex ed. We need to increase and strengthen policies for family leave, for childcare, for healthcare, for food security, for housing, I mean, all of these things, right? That's a good faith conversation if you really want to limit access, or if you really want to limit the number of abortions that occur. That's the counter. But people that are anti-abortion also tend to be against those things. And so frankly, in this like current moment, and when we actually are sitting here having a real conversation about what does a post-Roe society look like, I don't know that I'm like past it to a positive enough place to have a great answer, because I'm baffled, because that's what the conversation should be.
We're still in this just dark time of navigating, questioning, looking at what we could do, and it's hard to kind of imagine a world after such a landmark case is no longer holding our rights together. But suggestions.
All of that, and the number of abortions that happened in the United States actually decreased after Roe, because it was available, right? Like this is the way to do it. Yet we're having this conversation. The abortion rate in 2017 was 13.5 abortions per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44. It went down from 2014, and it's the lowest rate ever observed in the United States since 1973, the year that Roe became the law. You want to limit abortion, exactly. Make all this possible. Again, we're in an abstinence-only state, yet teen pregnancy is on the rise in Indiana, and it was not that long ago under the administration of our now former vice president, former governor, where there's an HIV outbreak in our state. How does that happen?
So if this is not, this conversation and this political attention is not about decreasing the rates of people receiving abortions, we gotta figure out why they're having these conversations. So Shruti, I want to ask you, because you did touch on this a little bit in one of your answers. This leak is historic. This Supreme Court leak, this doesn't happen, and it was a very once in a lifetime witness that we saw in our headlines on that evening. What could this leak and the possible overturning of Roe v. Wade mean for the future of similar cases in the courts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was highly significant in so many different ways. And I think what the primary thing that we can take from the leak, as well as the decision itself that was leaked, is that the guardrails are off at the Supreme Court. That not only is this an extreme Supreme Court, but they feel empowered to do whatever they want, and that they're placing ideology over law, over the Constitution, and they're willing to be completely inconsistent, and they're really pushing a vision of the future of this country that is extremely hierarchical and puts a small group of people at the top, right? So I think all of this is quite scary. If you look at where the Supreme Court is now, I mean, it's unprecedented in so many different ways, right? So we have this leak and this decision that's coming out, but remember, we also have things like, you know, we have the wife of a Supreme Court justice who was advocating and helping with an insurrection to overthrow the government of the United States. And then that Supreme Court justice refused to recuse himself from the case that involved revealing the correspondence his wife had, you know, with the people who were pursuing that insurrection against the United States. And if you listen to what I'm saying, and if you were to say this about any other country, you would think, well, this is just totally ridiculous, right? This is off the rails. And so first of all, the conduct, and it is, right? I mean, and it's scary to think that this is the United States of America. So on one hand, the actual conduct of the Supreme Court is totally off the rails, and they're not acting in a way that would engender public trust or, you know, even competence, right? Or you know, that to let us believe that they're acting in a quite competent way. But on top of that, you have in addition to their actual behavior, right, and these types of things that I'm talking about, or like leaking these decisions, and there were actually 3 leaks. It wasn't just this decision. There was a leak before, a couple days before the actual decision, saying which justices had lined up how, right, and that gives us some ideas as to why this was leaked. But in addition to that, almost every decision that involves rights that has come down this term basically is telling us that that the Supreme Court majority sees they have a very, I would say it's a Christian nationalist view of the world, right? And that certain groups are going to be protected at the expense of others, certain groups have rights and certain groups don't. And if you look at the way that the Dobbs leaked opinion was written, again, we have to see what the final decision is like and just hope that it will be a little bit better. It puts in doubt almost all of our precedents after the 13th Amendment, right? The 13th Amendment was the one that banned enslavement in this country. The 14th Amendment, which is where Roe is grounded, is the one that had the right to privacy and has our equal protection clause. And so anything coming out of that, coming after that is basically at risk now. And our entire current society is based on this premise of equality and liberty and due process that is all at risk right now. I mean, we could literally go back to the 1870s, right, which is when these amendments came to pass. So when I say the guardrails are off, I mean, it's off in terms of the behavior of the justices. They're not acting in a way that really supports public trust, but they're also not acting in a way that supports any previous precedent or that they're acting in line with legal doctrines or principles. They have a sort of ideology and they're operating in loyalty to that ideology. They're not upholding the law of the United States of America. And that's a really scary position to be in right now.
Sorry, that was exactly how I felt. Thank you, Shruti. So we're getting close to the end of this moderated discussion, so I wanted to open up one last question for all of you. I don't want to try to make this a situation that it's not. This is a very, very scary, bad time that we're in, especially for reproductive health. And so I'm not going to try to sugarcoat or make this a positive note in any way. We know that post-decision, post-real decision, it's going to be a badder baddest case scenario, right? So what do those scenarios look like for you in your own spaces and in your own work? And just so that we're all prepared for what that would look like after the summer. This also wasn't a scripted question, so they're probably going to think about it.
I think it's exactly what Kara said. It's those exceptions. It's what can we get? What can we hold on to? What can we preserve right now? And kind of as we all let out that collective sigh after Shruti spoke, there are consequences to the vote. Under the last presidential administration, there were 3 nominations to the Supreme Court. All 3 are very conservative. There are real consequences to people not voting or voting one way or the other. And it's going to take, this is a long fight. As I said, it took 50 years to get here. This is not about this summer. This is not about the 2023 legislative session, but this is about the next 50 years and what that could or could not look like. And for people that say, oh, we're just going to move. A lot of people said that in 2016. A lot of us are here in the same room. That's not the answer to where we're at right now. So let's think of tangible ways and remind ourselves that this is a long road ahead. This is not just about this summer, but what can we continue to fight for and what are we fighting against? There are real consequences to the election, and Women for Change commissioned a study last year around redistricting with Dr. Warshaw. There were quite a few people that are upset about the Warshaw study. There's never been a rebuttal, but what his study showed is that our maps are more partisan gerrymandered than any map enacted in the United States over the past 50 years. This is not just about this summer. This is not just about this case, but this is so much more to have a representative government that really speaks to we the people.
Thank you.
Sigh.
All of that just makes me, again, grateful for Women for Change and the work that y'all are doing. It's not just about the summer. I think we have to look ahead to the possibilities that worse is to come, right? People talk about moving, harder to move if there's a national ban, which people are already talking about, right? So we need to do the work here, right? As much as we're able. You know, this is all connected on a continuum, and the fear around other rights that we may lose, including the right to contraception, right? I don't think that that's tomorrow, right? But I do think that that's something we need to be thinking about, right? Language around fetal personhood is really scary, and the other things that end up included in that. I can't remember which of you was mentioning when the way that we date pregnancies, right? But if we date a pregnancy as before, before a missed period, all the things, right? And we, that also means before a pregnancy test would be positive, right? So does that mean that, this feels a little crazy, but what happens? There's so many medical procedures that you need a negative pregnancy test to move forward with, but what if you can actually be pregnant before a pregnancy test becomes positive? Can no one get any treatments anymore? Like, there's so many, right? That's a little bit extreme, but I think all of this a little bit comes into play. So these are the places that my brain is going. I think for what do I do right now and yesterday and tomorrow and the day after the decision comes out is continue to fight to get high quality contraception into people's hands. That's my corner right now. Can I briefly talk a little bit about Path for You? Okay, so again, Path for You is a statewide contraceptive access project. We have virtual visits as well as in person, fully funded. So completely free, whatever method, founded in a reproductive justice framework. So that also means that if you want to conceive now, we will talk to you about preconception counseling and how to do that safely and healthily, and get you prenatal vitamins, right? But for folks that don't want to be pregnant right now or tomorrow, again, same day access, comprehensive counseling on all methods. And we really try to make it very, very easy and eliminate as many barriers as possible. So Path for You with the number 4 .org. Again, materials outside, please spread the word, eliminate barriers and increase access as much as possible today and tomorrow.
I guess it's my turn to jump in. Is that?
Yep, sorry.
So I would again echo what the two of you have said. I think that's amazing, and I want to echo that this is a long fight and why this is. So the other day I read a statistic saying that American women are now 50% more likely to die in childbirth or within a year after the birth of a child than their mothers were, right? So 50% more likely now than our mother's generation. And that is really scary, right? So, wherever you might try to move to, that's a statistic that is nationwide. So why is this? It's because it's really easy we know from the past that it's really easy to tear things down and it's hard to build things up, right? And when we talk about things like it takes a village to raise a child, that is true for democracy and investing in our communities and building a stronger society as well. Again, it's easy to tear things down, it's easy to lie, it's easy to spread misinformation. It is hard, but ultimately much more rewarding and much more important to build things up, to look for solidarity, with others to, to get as many people as possible to vote, to expand rights. That is always going to be the harder battle than limiting rights and tearing them down. And so fighting the good fight, I think, means understanding all of this. And it also means all of these things are interconnected in positive ways as well. If you fight to help expand voting access, you are strengthening your community in so many different ways. If you share information on healthcare or increase access to healthcare, your community will be healthier, and people will be able to do more. So these are all interconnected. And I think when the Dobbs decision does come out, again, we need to think about how it's interconnected, because at least the way that the draft opinion was written, it puts into doubt the right to birth control, to same-sex marriage, to privacy in your sexual relationships, to all sorts of different things. So what that means, if any of those, so it may be that abortion doesn't affect you or your family, but all these other things, some of them will, right? And something having to do with equality in the 14th Amendment will affect you and your family and your neighbors and whoever you're interacting with. So anything that you do to support any piece of this, whether you're supporting abortion access or same-sex marriage or something like that, is all helping everybody at once, right? And so I think we need to think about that. And when it's hard, it is really hard to build solidarity. It's really hard to bring disparate groups together and work towards common goals, but we all benefit in so many ways from that. And so I think we just need to concentrate on that and building the future that we want to see.
So we are done with our moderator discussion, and now are opening up to Q&A. You can ask the whole group or one of our panelists in particular, but just simply raise your hand and we will call on you if you have a question.
Danielle, since this is a Women for Change event, can I just chime in?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Kind of to what Shruti said, really, really proud that within the month, effective July 1st, in part thanks to Women for Change, Hoosier women will now have postpartum care through Medicare, Medicaid, 365 days after giving birth, as opposed to the current law, which is 60 days. So we're looking at creating positive change for women in all different areas. So again, thank you to all of you. Thank you to our committee members and board members and everyone, but we're continuing to affect change for women in so many different ways. I'm just really proud of that.
We're all proud of Women for Change.
Thanks.
I have a question for you, Danielle. You're with Planned Parenthood, right?
Yeah.
And you said you're in a 6-state area.
We are.
I heard on a podcast that Illinois Planned Parenthood is putting a big foot over by St. Louis. Are they doing anything over by Evansville?
I did read that article about Illinois. And Illinois is not in our affiliate.
I thought it's like Kentucky and like.
No.
East, right? Isn't that what your affiliation is?
We actually have a little different geographical spacing. We did not group them by proximity. We grouped them by similar political atmosphere. So we have Indiana, Kentucky, Hawaii, Alaska, Idaho, and Washington.
Oh, wow.
So we communicate really, really effectively with Kentucky, which we do have communications with our clinics and with our advocacy team on how we will train people into Illinois in the time of a complete and total ban in Indiana, if and when that happens. But yeah, Chicago is doing really great things, and I think it was a $500,000 pledge to making sure that people in Illinois and around Illinois can come in and receive those services.
One of my questions would be, we look historically at when we take away these rights and allow criminalization, it often affects minority communities. So we look historically at the war on drugs. And while this isn't the same, it has a similar precedent of the war on drugs and how that affected minorities. And now we're looking at the possibility of criminalization of abortion. How do we assimilate and advocate to make sure we're protecting our judicial system and not entering into this state again where the 13th Amendment is at risk as well, or now it's a war on women too?
Shruti, this is a long question.
I think I heard most of that, but just as I think the question was about that, the worst of like policing and mass incarceration falling on certain communities, and that we might see that again. I think we're definitely going to see that again. So we're already seeing the policing of pregnancy now when Roe still exists, right? And again, it's not wealthy white women whose pregnancies are policed, right? It's people that are already sort of subject to lots of different, I guess, lots of different forms of policing, right? Not just from law enforcement, but from lots of different avenues. And I think what might even make this worse than pre-Roe is that we now have all these surveillance, not we, but many actors have surveillance tools at their disposal that weren't there before, right? So fighting that kind of surveillance and enhancing medical privacy in general, and enhancing the ability of people to speak with their healthcare providers in private and, in a situation of trust, will help in all of those ways. And I think, we are going to see, if not in Indiana, other states are going to criminalize various forms of reproductive health access, right? We don't know how far they will go. And I think we need to do everything possible to take what we've learned about surveillance and policing of marginalized communities and everything we know about pushing back on that, and continue to push back and fight for more protective laws, right? If we didn't have a situation where, we can basically be surveilled without our permission, we might be in a different situation right now, right? So again, this is all about fighting on different fronts, but being very aware. I am sure that the weight of these policies and what happens will definitely fall upon people who are already vulnerable and marginalized, and we have to stay vigilant, I think, for that as much as we can.
So typically when one is arguing or discussing with someone who's more conservative, the argument that the conservative group brings up is that abortion is most utilized by, and then there's this litany of things, immoral, promiscuous, people who use it as a form of birth control. And I know that's not why people pick abortions, but isn't there any statistics to say, I think Kara was you that said something about a percentage of women that have abortions are married with children. Like, what is the statistics so that you can come back with some, rather than just saying you're wrong and you're mean.
Yeah. Do you have a concrete statistics? I just usually say the majority of women that seek abortion are already mothers, 58%. 58% are already mothers, and that's what we see, right? And again, I don't need a reason, right? But so many people are seeking abortion care because they want to care for the families that they have, right? Or because they really badly want to be parents later when it's the right time, either, right? Also, we have to remember that a pregnancy is 14 times more dangerous, right, than an abortion procedure. So, infinite things, right? The number of health conditions that can be exacerbated by a pregnancy and by carrying a pregnancy to term. Like, we're putting people at risk, right? This idea of adoption is totally viable, whatever that was she said, right? Like, pregnancy is an enormous stress on a body, and while a wonderful thing when it's wanted and all the things, like it also has significant health risks. As does delivery, and 14 times higher risk than an abortion procedure.
And 3 out of 5 Hoosiers know someone who had an abortion. So maybe they need to remind themselves that they know people in their circle that have had to seek an abortion for some reason or the other. We want to other people and say it's for that group over there. but it's everyone.
We rank 46th, right, for maternal mortality, right? 41st for infant mortality. Like, we're not doing awesome.
I just want to add that I think when we hear people saying things like that, they're talking about shame culture, right? And they're usually doing it for two reasons. One is to say that if bad things happen or somebody's faced with a situation, that it's their fault and they deserved it, that they did something to deserve it. And correspondingly, so the person saying that feels like, well, it's not going to happen to them, right? Because they're not doing XYZ, they're not drinking or doing whatever it is. And I think one important way to push back on all of this is that when we're talking about rights, when we're talking about constitutional rights or human rights, they are not allocated based on who deserves them or who deserves to have rights. We've already decided in the United States Constitution that every person in the United States has equal rights. So it doesn't matter if you don't like what I'm doing or you don't like my clothing or the way that I act or the parties that I go to or whatever. I have the same rights as anyone else, and that's the same thing for them too. And so I would go back to that principle. I guess the last thing I want to bring up related to that is that one of the scariest things about the Dobbs opinion is there's all this stuff about citing these medieval jurists and people saying really crazy things about witchcraft and all this kind of stuff. That's because they had to go back in time to find someone who basically said that when a woman gets married, she consents to whatever happens afterwards and is like under the power of her husband. And if people understand that this is where those arguments lead, right? If you were saying that rights depend on like whether somebody deserves them or not, and depends on how moralistic or ethical their behavior was, then you're going down the slippery slope, and like there's really no end to that. I don't think most women in 2022, or men, anyone who's getting into a marriage thinks that they're consenting to whatever happens after that, right? They think they're joining a union. So anyway, I just go back to everybody is deserving of equal rights and everybody is deserving of full participation in our society.
There's time for one more question. I know you have your hand up.
Well, I was just gonna piggyback off of what you said, and I think I would like to have more. I think education is needed because I think that we need to have more when we're in a discussion with someone, have more information to give them. Because I hear all the time about well, we're against partial birth abortion. We're like, what exactly is that? Because a lot of people, I mean, it's just something that they say. It sounds terrible. So I just think that we probably need to do more. One thing is more education. Just like with the 58%, how many women actually get an abortion at 12 weeks versus, the second trimester? That might be something that would be helpful. We could enter into discussion with people with statistics.
Can I make one comment on that, just to piggyback on that? Because I think education, I totally agree with you. I think education is the key. And I'm a faculty member and we have college students here. And we want to have conversations. Like we had a trial conversation the other day called Let's Talk About Abortion. It's not something that even young women talk to each other about. It's not. We're told, not to, that's not something you talk about. Maybe your mother doesn't even know. Maybe your sister doesn't know. Maybe you share it with your friends. So just open conversation about a range of reproductive things. And most college students are really, interested and intrigued about talking about that. So I hope that, we could do a lot by just more open conversation.
So I'm going to plug some Planned Parenthood stuff for you all, because while we don't specifically do things like this, where we are engaging in a really great conversation, we do a lot of legislative action. And I know some people on our Zoom, and some of you might be wondering, what can I do? So I'm going to plug some things for you. There is a little flyer on the front table if you want to grab one of these. It explains everything that we're doing over the summer and things that you can do. There's a QR code right here that you will scan. The first and foremost thing that you need to do is sign our petition. So we are running a petition right now to tell Governor Holcomb not to hold a special session this summer. We know that the possibility of some sort of restriction on abortion is going to happen in Indiana. We just don't want it to happen this summer. We need time to prepare, to educate, to have these conversations. And so we're going to be delivering that ask to Governor Holcomb this month. So if you haven't signed that online petition yet, go ahead and do that. Additionally, we are having a phone bank party here in this room on the 21st. The link is also on this QR code to register, where we will be calling constituents in Indy and the broader state to let them know about the petition, and also to let them know my final thing. We're hosting a large reproductive health fair on July 9th. It is a Bands Off block party, where it is a hybrid between a rally and a festival. We will have services on site, health services on site, including testing. With the milk bank will be there. We'll have speakers and really great thought leaders involved, and we will also have vendors who are selling some really great merchandise, and we get to donate those proceeds to direct funds for people to receive abortions, whether it's in state or out of state. So we have that set up. All of that is on this QR code, so make sure you grab that before you head out. It's on the front table. And then I want to say a last thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much for this really great, engaging conversation, and I'm going to invite Noelle up to close this out.
My name is Noelle, and I'm on staff here at Growth for Change. I'd like to give a big round of applause for panelists. So much for being here tonight. We are thrilled to see you all in person and all those who are attending virtually. Change isn't free, so we do appreciate all of you being here and donating your time, energy, and money to us. If you want to continue engaging in these conversations, mark your calendars for Wednesday, July 13th for a showing at the Pantheon on a young woman's journey of the right to choose. Also spend a Thursday with us in October, on October 6th, for our civic engagement concert. We hope you have a wonderful evening, and again, we really appreciate you all being here in